Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
A warmer from Viva! Welcome to lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Soups with myself, Greg Oops Peterson, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. We've got an absolutely excellent podcast for you. We're going to have this man joining me each of the next 2 days because Rob Donaldson is a wealth of information. He does a great job being able to break down this great game of college basketball. You're able to catch him on youtube.com/Rob Donaldson. He's going to be joining me today to talk a little bit about the second-year coaches that he's feeling a little bit bullish/bearish on, how murky it is to be able to take a look at some of these teams that do have a second-year coach, because some coaches very much overachieve, some underachieve, and some of these second-year coaches, they were very much selling out to be able to have a big year number one. Some of these guys, they built their program just very, very slow and methodically as well. So we're going to be touching upon all those aspects and so much more. We're also going to be taking a look at the Big Ten and so many of the coaches out there, as well as there's quite a few of intrigue looking at Ohio State and so much more. And then tomorrow on the podcast, we're going to be doing the MAC preview edition, the one with 1A, with our good friend Rob Donaldson. So you're going to be getting him on back-to-back days. We love Rob on this podcast and love having you aboard wherever you get your podcast. Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify. Do appreciate you guys. And if you ever have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of 2 ways to be able to fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters EM, they mean does not matter. So as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated. And then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. Well, I did not get in any Twitter/X questions today. Everything is powered by EdgeBoost. EdgeBoost is making sure that bettors are able to have access to their funds whenever and wherever they want. EdgeBoost is an account that is set up for bettors to be able to make sure that 100% of gambling transactions are approved. And when you go to edgeboost.bet, put in that promo code of Greg, G-R-E-G. That's going to get you a $1 match on your first deposit up to $25. And how about if we do dive in with our good friend Rob Donaldson, who you're able to follow on Twitter/X at RobDFB. And Rob, it is always a pleasure, my friend. Thank you so much.
Yeah, thank you for having me on, Greg. And, I'm glad, like I always say, I'm glad we're talking about college basketball, even during kind of the quote-unquote dog days of summer, because, hey, the season keeps getting closer and closer. We know what these teams are going to look like. And honestly, based on today's kind of episode or topic, I'm excited to kind of see how these sort of schools can use this as a launching point after the offseason kind of took place.
Absolutely, and it has been a really interesting offseason, and it's just a really fascinating landscape in general in college basketball with having so many year 2 coaches, because a lot of these guys were flops, a lot of these guys really boomed, and I think that gauging guys in year number 2 can oftentimes be tricky, because what we saw in year 1 is typically not what we get in year number 2.
Absolutely, and honestly, in that year 1 span, yeah, you're going to have those Pat Kelsey types, or, potentially like a Ben McCollum or Scott McCaslin, where they bring over a lot of their guys, or they have a really good transfer portal class, which leads to immediate results. But truly, that's not how it's supposed to play out. Usually you have to kind of make those recruits actually buy in and believe into what you're potentially building at that new school or that new program. And I think a lot of year 1 coaches who didn't have that kind of instantaneous boost might have that this year, just based on what they were able to show on the court.
Yep, absolutely. I think that it is so interesting to take a look at these guys in year number 2, and how do you end up gauging some of these guys that maybe underachieved last year? Like, I take a look at a program like Oklahoma State. I feel like they did a relatively solid job here in the offseason of adding some guys. I feel good about a guy like Steve Lutz. That's a program that I think is heading in the right direction. Then we've got a lot of mid-major programs where it felt like it was a little bit stagnant in year number 1, but you tell that there were signs of improvement with a team like even a Central Arkansas.
Yeah, and even if you want to talk about like kind of notable quote unquote basement dwellers over the years, you look at DePaul with Chris Holtmann, that didn't really feel like the basement dwelling DePaul teams of the past. And that's a really strong coaching staff that obviously has Holtmann, but they also have Martin, who coached at Southern Illinois as well, and has that sort of pedigree at a higher sort of institution within college basketball. I feel like DePaul could be a team to take a look at. Kyle Smith, obviously, over at Stanford. And year one, Stanford kind of got buried in the middle slash bottom of that ACC tier. But at the same time, we know what Kyle Smith is capable of and what he can potentially build. And I kind of felt like Stanford was a little bit better than years past as well. So there are some teams to kind of take a look at that aren't just the Rick Pope or Mark Pope rather at the Kentucky Wildcats or Dusty May at Michigan that should be getting some eyes. And I'm glad we're talking about it today.
Yes, I am as well, because I do think that there's a lot of coaches that in year number one, it might have been a little bit less than savory for them, but you know what? I think that there might be a bust out in year number two, but this is a guy that was really able to have a lot of success in year one. I just think that it's going to get better in year two, though, and that would be Mark Byington over at Vanderbilt. I absolutely love what they were able to do last season, and I just take a look at their prospects for this season, and I feel really bullish about them with all the guys that they brought into the transfer portal. Feels like they've got a little bit more down low, and they're still going to be holding true to having really good backcourt play.
Yeah, and with Mark Byington, we saw this at James Madison, obviously, but it wasn't an overnight build. Now, it was nice that Vanderbilt in year one did acquire the pieces that were necessary to make it to the NCAA tournament. And to your point, I think we're going to see a repeat, if not an elevation, to what they kind of showed on the court last season. And when you do look at Vanderbilt, I still feel like they left wins on the table last season, as crazy as that sounds, because, yeah, everybody kind of knows the historical track record of these schools. Again, we've talked about this on almost every single episode. When we're talking about a new landscape of college basketball, building through the portal, building through NIL, almost this opportunity to shoehorn your school from the basement into the conversation, I feel like there were schools that already have been taking advantage of it. And yeah, Mark Byington, Vanderbilt, year one, I would consider them one of those schools.
Yep, absolutely. And I think that it's going to be a lot of fun to see what they're going to be able to do in year number two, because I mean, obviously Mark Pope, Dusty May, I feel like these guys are very much known. I feel like we know that these schools are going to be very rock solid in year number two, but I do think that some of these other schools are sort of diamonds in the rough, and I do think that there might be some gems to be had. As joining me on the show, we do have Rob Donaldson, who does a great job with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. He's joining me right here on Coast to Coast Soups, and I thought that last year's cycle was very interesting, to say the least, because again, you did have a lot of flops, you did have a lot of hits, and I do think that for some of these schools as well, it's just all about gauging how the back half of last season ended as well, because I feel like there were some of these schools that it might have been a little bit stagnant towards the beginning part of the year, and if you look at the full record, it says, man, this team was not necessarily very good, but there are some teams that played their best basketball of late, and I take a look at a school, even like an NJIT, and I think that there might be strides forward for a school like that.
Yeah, NJIT, I would shoehorn into the mix. If you want to even talk about a team that, it almost kind of seems like they've fallen off the radar over the past 3 years or so, but they are still like one of the traditionally powerful teams in a power conference. Look at Diebler over at Ohio State. I mean, who knows what your kind of thoughts on him are in terms of him being the guy, or maybe he was just kind of caught right in the interim spot at the perfect time to get a long-term job. Well, technically speaking, this is going to be his second run at it in a full season, and Ohio State is not a team that's shy with talent. They're going to bring dudes in, and he's had a lot of postseason success already in just the Big Ten tournament. If he can somehow convert that to wins in the regular season and put together a full roster, I wouldn't be surprised if Ohio State is one of those schools that jumps from the middle all the way to the top three in the Big Ten, considering how kind of wide open it is this season.
Yep, and with that Ohio State program, I think that they're going to be a fun one to be taking a look at, because you just don't get a lot of coaching changes in the Big Ten. We did see quite a few this offseason, which was very uncharacteristic, with Indiana, obviously Iowa, and Minnesota all having their coaching changes. And I do think that the Big Ten in general just did a really good job with this coaching cycle. I know that we're talking a lot more about the year two guys, but I think that all three of those guys are set up to be able to elevate their programs right away.
And honestly, the Big Ten, I think, is in a really good good spot because they still have the longtime tenured guys who are notably very, very good. The Matt Painters, the Tom Izzos, Brad Underwoods, but you have this base of coaches that they've almost brought in over just the past 2 years. When you're talking about, Sprinkle, Eric Musselman, Dusty May, and everybody you just named as well, that was just a new hire this offseason. And I feel like because of the, I don't want to say like uncertainty, but the upside that potentially looms within all of those new regimes. Yeah, I think when you're looking at the Big Ten and talking about the Big Ten, obviously Mick Cronin is a staple there too. You're talking about a lot of upside in year 2 of being in this conference that could elevate it to be like an almost SEC uprising like we've seen over the past 3. That truly would not surprise me. And yeah, that might be considered a hot take, but the Big Ten might actually be on the map this season.
Yep, absolutely. I do think that for the Big Ten, it's going to be a very good year for them. And I do think that moving forward, we've got a lot of value with a ton of those programs. As Rob Donaldson, who does such great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets, he's joining me right here on Coach Goes Hoops. And it has been great talking with Rob a lot about these year 2 coaches and trying to find the value/lack of value there. But how about if we talk about some year 3 coaches? We're going to be diving in a little bit on the Big Ten with Rob, as well as we saw some interesting coaching hires out there. And we're going to take a look at some of the teams that he's feeling bull/bearish on as well. That's coming up on the flip side right here on Coach Goes Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now a part of the VSiN Family Podcast.
Warning, the following ZipRecruiter radio spot you are about to hear is going to be filled with F-words.
When you're hiring, we at ZipRecruiter know you can feel frustrated, forlorn even, like your efforts are futile, and you can spend a fortune trying to find fabulous people, only to get flooded with candidates who are just fine. Fortunately, ZipRecruiter figured out how to fix all that. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. With ZipRecruiter, you can forget your frustrations because we find the right people for your roles fast, which is our absolute favorite F word. In fact, 4 out of 5 employers who post on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day.
Fantastic.
So, whether you need to hire 4, 40, or 400 people, get ready to meet first-rate talent. Just go to ZipRecruiter.com/zip to try ZipRecruiter for free. Don't forget, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. Finally, that's ZipRecruiter.com/zip.
And we're back here in lovely Las Vegas for Coast to Coast Hoops with myself, Greg Peterson, now part of the VSiN Family Podcast. Always great to be joined by Rob Donaldson, who does great work with the show/podcast, Rob's Best Bets. You're able to catch him on the old Twitter/X at RobDFB all together. And Rob, we've been talking a lot about these year 2 coaches. How about if we talk about some of these year 3 coaches as well? Because I do think that there's a little bit of intrigue with this regard too. How do you just gauge guys on a year in and year out basis? Because I do feel like with all the turnover in college basketball, it does make it a little bit more difficult to have coaches that you do/do not trust them, because it just feels like it gets a little bit more random, and it is based on just whether or not these guys hit with regards to some of their transfers.
There's some coaches in year 2 and year 3 that I truly believe are up against it. I look at a Mike Rhodes. I think he would have a better talent accumulation if he was still coaching at VCU. And the reason why I say that is Penn State is receiving up transfers, but not receiving a ton of down transfers, because they're still sort of this team that recruits well from the high school level enough to fill up some roster or playing time. And a lot of the down transfers from higher major levels are looking for like 30 minutes, 28 minutes per game that maybe Penn State can't give them or guarantee them. And they've found themselves in this weird little position of, hey, unlike a team like a VCU, you're not getting up transfers from lower mid majors. You're not getting down transfers from these higher mid majors. You're kind of stuck as a tweener in between both of those sort of things. And I feel like when you're talking about a guy like a Mike Rhodes, or just kind of looking over the landscape of basketball and seeing the teams that maybe truly aren't investing in their program, I do think that they are the guys who are going to end up finding their way to a different destination sooner rather than later, and it's going to befit them. And unfortunately, in the interim, that actually opens up a really good door for, I guess, us as bettors betting against their team.
Yeah, but absolutely. And that's what we always like. We always like to be able to find a little bit of value there. And I do think that it is really interesting to just take a look at the landscape of this all, because I do think that with regards to coaches that are/are not trustworthy, it's a little bit more of a, shall we say, different puzzle this day and age, just because a lot of the guys that were always trustworthy, like Bill Self, for example, over at Kansas, I feel like he hasn't necessarily done the world's greatest job last few years with the transfer portal, with having so much volatility with regards to these rosters. And I do think that that makes things so difficult to be able to gauge too.
Yeah, and I mean, when you're looking at a guy like a Bill Self, or you're looking at a guy like a Coach Cal, these are coaches that you have to maybe question where their motivation lies. I think with Cal, it actually lies in, hey, I get a chance to rebuild something new at a program that hasn't really felt that newness in a while. Now, if you're Bill Self and you're staying at the same place, and all of a sudden, all those recruits that you used to get from the high school ranks that would just flock to your school because the only true motivation was, hey, I want to play in college as short as a period of time as possible, and then I'm going off to the pros. I just want a coach who's going to vouch for me and really build me up to be that sort of guy to get paid. Well, now they're getting paid in college, and all of a sudden, that appeal of a Kansas, that appeal of a traditional power, maybe at Kentucky, for example. Who knows what Mark Pope's second year is going to look like here? But I think there's a lot of different factors at play now that are leaving those traditional blue bloods at least a little bit more susceptible than years past. And when you look at a guy like a Bill Self, maybe that's wearing on him. Maybe his health just in general is wearing on him as well. But I think there's a lot of factors stacking up against these traditionally prominent schools that could end up almost burying him in the standings a little bit, which I'm actually for.
Yep, I certainly am. And I do think that it's interesting the way that some of these schools have been able to rise up, because now if I look at more of these trustworthy coaches, it goes to Houston and someone like a Kelvin Sampson, who's been able to do a great job of just being able to play rough and tumble defense. You know what you're going to be able to get out of him year in and year out. That's always a school that I can trust in. And I look at some of these guys that have flipped programs, like Ryan Odom. I have no question about him being able to turn around Virginia and have a good year, because I know that he's been able to do it at a few other stops.
Yeah, and when you look at the talent accumulation, the two guys you just mentioned are perfect examples of this. But, you know, Ryan Odom and obviously Houston with Kelvin Sampson, those are coaches that know their identity and bring in talent that fits that identity. It's not like Kelvin Sampson is one of those traditional 4 or 5 year starter type guys that came into the program. No, he's utilizing the portal. So is Odom over the past years at Utah State and VCU. And yeah, Kansas is utilizing the portal. You know, Kentucky, Michigan State, they're all utilizing the portal to an extent. But I feel like when you're not getting that crazy, overwhelming youth talent accumulation, and, you know, the guys like a Kelvin Sampson or Ryan Odom were never really getting that, I think that actually gives them a leg up when you are competing for veterans in the space of sort of this college basketball free agency period. And yeah, those are going to be the coaches that I kind of tend to like more, rather than the coaches of years past where all they were really doing was hoarding as much talent as possible.
Yep, and I think that that brings us to Louisville, because I think that Pat Kelsey is going to be one of the most interesting coaches in all of college basketball. The way that he was able to get that team motivated, you could tell that they were just experiencing some three-point shooting lulls towards the beginning part of the season. They were able to persevere through that. They made a nice run to be able to make it to the NCAA tournament. Like, I take a look at that program, and that's a program that I really want to be buying in on this season.
Yeah, and you know, I love Pat Kelsey. Obviously, he's done it at Winthrop, Charleston, and now he did it in year one at Louisville, that had seen the dumpster for the past, few years under Kenny Payne. And when you are looking at that year one success, you can potentially liken it to like a Dennis Gates, where year one brings in a ton of transfer talent, has a great year. Year two, they don't win a single conference game. Like, I'm not saying that's completely out of the realm of possibility for Pat Kelsey, but to your point, I feel like there's enough talent here that we know is certifiably good. And I know that we think that Pat Kelsey is a great coach in college basketball as well. And the ACC isn't as stacked as the SEC on a game-to-game scale. And so I feel like when you are in, say, the ACC, or kind of like the Mountain West or the A10, and you're one of these coaches trying to make that impact early in your tenure, you're going to have a lot more leeway for mistakes, for gelling, kind of playing with your roster than you would at, say, like a Missouri. And I feel like that definitely benefits some of these guys.
Yep, I feel like it does as well, and I think that that is so interesting to be taking a look at, and it is just a changing landscape in college basketball right now with the way that we're able to gauge all these guys, some of the upside, some of the, shall we say, downside of some of these programs as well. So it always makes things very interesting to be taking a look at. And that's why I love always picking your brain, Rob, because you do such a great job of being able to gauge this sport. And I want to just wrap it up with this because I always love asking you this question over the last few weeks since I know you've been hard at work taking a look at this upcoming college basketball season. Who's a program or two that now you're starting to feel a little bit more bullish/bearish on based on your findings over the last few weeks?
I brought up Kyle Smith in this episode at Stanford, and I think that's a fantastic pick. But let me even go a little bit more off the radar to a guy that almost kind of fell off the name trolley, if you will, within the coaching world, and that's Sundance Wicks over at Wyoming. Obviously, we saw what he did at Green Bay. In just a short time, he took that team from a 2-win entire season-long team to actually being prominent and winning the Horizon League regular season title. And I feel like when you're talking about Wyoming, obviously, we have seen Wyoming experience some really great highs. I mean, they made the tournament, the NCAA tournament, in the past just 7 years or so. And I feel like when you're talking about Wyoming, that doesn't really happen, but it shows the potential. And if anybody, I think, in terms of these year 2 coaches can get something out of their G5, why not Sundance? He's already done it one time at a really dumpster fire-ish type program, and now all of a sudden you have a lot of this up in the airness when you're talking about in the Mountain West with coaches leaving, players leaving, programs potentially being a little bit more volatile than years past. Why not Wyoming? I feel like that's a pretty good spot to pick.
Yep, absolutely. And with the Cowboys of Wyoming, just really interesting to dive in on them as well because with Wyoming, it was a team that I felt like played really good defense. They did the little things well. They just needed more creators. Sundance Wicks had to do that on the fly because keep in mind that the Wyoming coach I was there in the previous year in Linder, he actually left for an assistant coaching job I think it was in May or something like that. Right. So Sundance Wicks was able to do a very solid job there in year number 1, but he doesn't do as solid of a job as you, Rob. You do such amazing work. Take a look at this great game that we all know and love of college basketball. Let the good people at home know what's all on tap for you and how people can follow along on social media and other platforms.
Well, hey, brother, I always appreciate you inviting me on. And for those who want to follow my college basketball bets once those are in season, you can do so on Twitter/X at RobDFB and also on my YouTube channel, which is just my name, Rob Donaldson. But as always, Greg, I appreciate having me on, man.
It is always great to be able to get Rob aboard. Such a wealth of knowledge when it comes to this great game of college basketball. And every single time he joins me, he lends such great insight. So a big thanks to Rob for joining me right here on Coast to Coast Hoops, now part of the VSiN family of podcasts. And if you do like what you're hearing from this fine podcast, Coast to Coast Hoops, you're able to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, Apple Podcasts, Google Play, Spotify, Stitcher, and TuneIn. If you have a question, comment, segment idea, what have you for this podcast, you do have one of two ways we fire those in. First one is my Twitter/X timeline at gunit_81. Keep in mind, letters naming does not matter, so as per usual, please do send these into the timeline. And the other way is find an Apple Podcast review. If you rate this podcast 5 stars, it is very much appreciated, and then from there, you're able to fire in whatever you'd like to hear on this podcast via that 5-star review. And I'm with you guys every single day on this podcast, regular season and off season, and as I alluded to in the show open, we're going to get you guys the MAC with 1A conference preview tomorrow. That is also going to be with our good friend Rob, so want to tune in for that tomorrow, and always appreciate you guys tuning in, and I will be with you guys once again tomorrow. Thank you.
Finding great candidates to hire can be like, well, trying to find a needle in a haystack. Sure, you can post your job to some job board, but then all you can do is hope the right person comes along. Which is why you should try ZipRecruiter for free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter doesn't depend on candidates finding you. It finds them for you. Its powerful technology identifies people with the right experience and actively invites them to apply to your job. You get qualified candidates fast. So while other companies might deliver a lot of hay, ZipRecruiter finds you what you're looking for. The needle in the haystack.
See why 4 out of 5 employers who post a job on ZipRecruiter get a quality candidate within the first day. ZipRecruiter, the smartest way to hire. And right now, you can try ZipRecruiter for free. That's right, free at ZipRecruiter.com/zip. That's ZipRecruiter.com/zip. ZipRecruiter.com/zip.